Welcome to Wild West Love Chronicles. Today I'm going to share with you a deeply touching and thrilling story. Let's listen closely and enjoy together. The dust never settled in Dust Creek. It rose with every hoofbeat and every sigh, clinging to boots and breath like a second skin. The town lay stretched along a cracked riverbed that hadn't tasted water in years. Wind whispered secrets through warped shutters and splintered signs, and the sun loomed above like a watching eye that never blinked. Mariah moved through the morning with the kind of grace you only learn from necessity. Her boots were too big, hand-me-downs from a ranch widow who'd pitied her enough to toss a sack of clothes out the back door one evening, but not enough to look her in the eyes. She made no complaint. She never did. She swept the floor of the Rusted Horn Saloon in long, silent strokes, eyes down, back straight, as cigarette ash floated down from the night before and mixed with the ever-present dust. The men had long since gone home or passed out under tables. Only the barkeep, old Clem, remained, counting bottles and muttering to himself about short pours and long debts. He didn't speak to Mariah, but he didn't have to. She knew her place. Mornings meant scrubbing bloodstains from poker tables and scrubbing laughter from memory. No one paid her much, but no one chased her off either, and that was enough. Outside, the town creaked awake, a mule brayed. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. Church bells didn't ring in Dust Creek. Preacher Kemp preferred to announce Sunday service with a pistol shot into the sky. Said it got more attention. Said it made the Lord listen harder. Mariah didn't like Preacher Kemp. She'd never said it, not even in whispers to herself, but she knew it deep in her bones. He was a tall man with two white teeth and eyes like gunmetal. He'd once lifted her chin with two fingers and asked why a pretty little thing like her walked around with eyes so low. That day she'd gone home and burned the dress she'd been wearing. Now she wore rough denim, sleeves rolled, hair tied back like a boy's. Still, it didn't stop the stares, or the bruises that never seemed to fade fast enough. By noon, she moved on to the stables. Old Bess, the stable master's mare, snorted as Mariah entered, as if greeting her. Mariah smiled and ran a hand along the horse's flank. Animals were simpler, honest. They didn't whisper behind hands or pretend kindness out of guilt. They just were. She shoveled hay, cleaned stalls, and worked until her arms ached. A boy her age passed by outside, kicked a rock down the road, and glanced in. Their eyes met for half a heartbeat before he looked away, his cheeks red. He didn't wave. No one ever did. By late afternoon, the sun hung low and mean in the sky. Mariah finished her chores, wiped sweat from her brow with the hem of her shirt, and headed back toward the tiny shed behind the blacksmith's forge that passed for her home. She was halfway there when she saw the judge. Thaddeus Crane stood on the porch of the courthouse, sipping something dark from a glass and watching the street like it owed him answers. His coat was black despite the heat, his boots polished to a mirror shine. His face, clean-shaven and sharp, was fixed in permanent disappointment. Mariah dropped her gaze instantly and moved faster, the way everyone did when the judge was near. You didn't have to be guilty in Dust Creek to be sentenced. You just had to be noticed. He watched her. She felt it like needles on her back. That night, Mariah sat on the wooden step outside her shed, legs drawn to her chest, her silver cross warm against her skin. The stars blinked weakly through the dust. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she ignored it. She hummed, soft and low, a tune her mother used to sing when the fever was taking her slow. The sound of hooves broke her reverie. Someone rode past, headed toward the chapel on the hill. She recognized the gait of the horse. It was the preacher's. She watched as he dismounted, adjusted his coat, and vanished into the chapel's side door. A few minutes later, a second rider came, too far away to see who. They didn't tie off their horse. Mariah frowned. The chapel was supposed to be empty this late. She remembered, with a chill, that Kemp had whispered to her earlier in the week, asking if she could help clean the altar after sundown. She'd lied and said she was sick. She was still sitting outside when a shadow fell across the moon. A man slouched past, bottle in hand, boots dragging in the dirt. Bo Renner. The name was still spoken in Dust Creek, though rarely in the present tense. He had once been a respected rancher with the biggest spread north of the pass, but since the fire took his wife and little girl, he'd folded inward. Now he lived in a shack filled with ghosts and liquor, and muttered at walls that didn't answer. People said he'd once put 3 bullets through a man's heart for stealing a calf. People also said he cried every time it rained. He didn't look at Mariah as he passed. She didn't look at him, but something about the way he stumbled, paused, and then looked up toward the chapel made her stomach twist. A dry wind blew, rattling the chapel's bell high on its steeple. By morning, the town was already buzzing. Mariah had barely stepped outside when she saw the crowd. They were gathered at the base of the hill, just before the chapel steps. Sheriff Doolan stood at the edge, face pale, hat in his hands. Behind him, a pair of deputies kept the crowd back. Mariah edged closer, heart hammering. She didn't know why. Not yet. The preacher's horse stood still, reins trailing in the dirt. There, at the top of the steps, lay Preacher Kemp. His body twisted unnaturally, eyes wide and unseeing, mouth agape, like it had been shouting when death came. Blood pooled beneath his skull, seeping into the stone. Around his neck, tied tight, was a torn strip of faded blue cotton, Mariah's scarf. She staggered backward, breath caught in her throat. Her fingers went instinctively to her neck. Empty. She hadn't even realized it was missing. Whispers rose like wind in dry grass. That's hers, ain't it? She worked for him sometimes, didn't she? I seen her going that way last night. That poor girl never did fit right. The sheriff's eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto hers. She didn't run. She couldn't. Her legs didn't listen. "Mariah!" someone shouted. She turned, saw Clem from the saloon pointing at her. His mouth moved, but she couldn't hear it. Everything had gone muffled, like she was underwater. Hands grabbed her. Cold steel clamped around her wrists. And then the judge was there. On the scene before the doctor, before the undertaker. He looked down at Preacher Kemp's corpse, then up at Mariah. His lips curled. "Well," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "looks like the Lord saw justice done early. Or maybe he's left it to us." Mariah shook her head, tried to speak, but no sound came out. She looked for a friendly face in the crowd and found none. Bo Renner stood at the back, leaning on a post. His bottle was gone. His eyes, red-rimmed and half-lidded, watched her with something between pity and recognition. Then the world turned upside down. And Dust Creek, true to its name, swallowed the truth in silence. The cold iron dug into Mariah's wrists as they dragged her through the courthouse doors. She stumbled once on the cracked steps, her boot heel catching on loose stone, and the deputy yanked her upright without so much as a glance. Her scarf, what used to be her scarf, still clung to the preacher's throat somewhere up the hill. She hadn't even had time to beg for it back. Not that anyone would have listened. Inside, the courthouse felt colder than it should have, shaded by narrow windows that let in light but no warmth. Dust swirled through the air like a waiting curse. Mariah had only been in the building once before, when she delivered a letter for the saloon owner to the clerk, and even then, the place had made her uneasy. Now the walls felt closer, pressing in. The sheriff barked at someone to fetch Judge Crane. His voice echoed through the hall like a shot in a canyon. Mariah stood in the middle of the room, shackled, dirty from the morning's grab, surrounded by men who looked at her like she was a rattlesnake about to strike. No one asked her if she wanted water. No one asked her if it was true. They just waited for the performance to begin. She saw the clerk, thin, pale, always twitching, shuffle past with a ledger, barely daring to look her way. One of the deputies leaned against the wall, chewing tobacco, smirking every time someone muttered her name. A few people came in from the street to watch, whispering behind hands, their voices full of fascination and disgust. Mariah stared at the floorboards. They were warped and splintered in places. One board near her foot had a dark stain that might have been blood. She didn't look up until the room hushed. Judge Crane entered like a storm wrapped in velvet. His coat flowed behind him. His polished boots clicked like gunshots. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her. Mariah met his gaze for a heartbeat, and something in his expression sent a chill down her spine. Not anger, not righteousness, satisfaction. He sat, adjusted his cuffs, and cleared his throat. "Let the record reflect," he said, his voice smooth as molasses, "that the accused is present and in custody, pending trial for the murder of Reverend Elijah Kemp, a beloved servant of the Lord in this town." The murmurs began again. Mariah's hands trembled in the cuffs. She felt like she was dreaming. But it wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't smell like sweat and old wood. Dreams didn't have men watching you like you were already swinging from a rope. "I didn't do it," she said. Her voice cracked from dryness. The judge smiled. "You'll have your moment, child. The law is nothing if not patient." But the law in Dust Creek wasn't patient. It wasn't fair. And it wasn't kind. By afternoon, the charges were written, signed, and stamped. Clem from the saloon gave a shaky statement that he saw her head toward the chapel the night before. A boy claimed he heard shouting near the chapel after dark. A woman from the boarding house said she always knew Mariah was too quiet to trust. No one asked why a poor girl would risk her life to kill the town preacher with no weapon and no place to hide. No one mentioned that Kemp often met young girls late at night under the guise of holy duty. No one wondered how a girl half his size could bash in a man's skull and have the strength to tie a scarf around his neck. Mariah sat in the holding room behind the courthouse, alone on a hard bench. The walls were carved with initials and curses. She stared at the rusted latch on the door. Her mouth was dry. She whispered her mother's name under her breath like a prayer, but no answer came. Evening came. No dinner. No blanket. Then the door opened, and Sheriff Doolin stepped inside. He didn't remove his hat. He looked tired, or maybe guilty. It was hard to tell. "You've got one night," he said. "Trial's tomorrow." "Tomorrow." Mariah blinked. How can there be a trial tomorrow?" The sheriff shrugged. "You know how it is. Folks want answers, want justice. Town's restless." "But I didn't," she began. He raised a hand. "Don't tell me. Tell the judge." She looked up at him. "You think I did it?" He hesitated. "Doesn't matter what I think. Jury will be picked by morning. You best pray." Then he was gone. Somewhere out in the dark, an owl cried. Mariah leaned her head against the wall and cried without sound. She didn't have money for a lawyer. She didn't have anyone to speak for her. She didn't even have the scarf anymore. Across town, the saloon buzzed with talk. Men placed bets on how long she'd last on the gallows. Some said the preacher had it coming. Others toasted to his soul. The whiskey flowed. And in the corner, Bo Renner sat, bottle untouched on the table, staring at nothing. He'd been there when they dragged her away. He'd seen the way her knees buckled when the judge declared she'd stand trial. He'd watched it all through a haze of grief and guilt and something else, something cold and rising. Years ago, he might have stood up, might have shouted, might have shot someone, but that man was gone. Bo tilted the bottle, poured a little into his glass, but didn't drink. The liquid caught the lamplight, amber and still. He could hear their voices, snakes coiled in every corner of the room. Never trusted that girl. She was always sneaking about. Shame. She had a pretty face. Bo closed his eyes. He saw his daughter's face. Alma, freckles across her nose, hair always coming loose from its ribbon. She'd been 13 when she started spending extra time at church, said she was helping the preacher with his sermons, said he needed someone pure to tend the altar. And then she stopped smiling. Bo had asked her once if everything was all right. She'd nodded. He asked again. She said nothing. 2 weeks later, he found her in the barn, with her wrists open like flower petals. No note, no sound, just silence. Bo hadn't gone near the church since. He hadn't spoken to the preacher. He hadn't raised his gun. He'd raised a bottle instead. But now, looking into that untouched glass, he saw something different. Not just his daughter's face, but Mariah's. The same tired eyes, the same kind of silence. He stood suddenly, sending the chair back against the wall. The bar quieted. Clem looked up from the counter. Bo didn't say a word. He just walked out into the night. The stars were out, cold and unfeeling. Bo walked, boots crunching gravel, past shuttered windows and quiet homes. He reached the edge of town and stood before the old fence line of what used to be his ranch. He hadn't crossed it in years, but he crossed it now. The barn was still there, barely. The roof had sagged, and the doors hung crooked. Inside, dust coated everything like a shroud. He moved slowly to the loft ladder, climbed. At the top, he reached the old trunk, the one Alma had kept locked, her little secrets. He forced the lid open. Inside were letters, a ribbon, a small book with worn edges. He opened it. Inside, pages of a journal, some entries short, others longer, all in her delicate hand. And then one name, over and over. Kemp. Bo sat in the dust, heart pounding, reading by moonlight. As he read, the silence turned into a storm. By dawn, the first bell rang across Dust Creek. The trial was beginning. Mariah stood in the courthouse again, her hands still shackled. Her hair had come loose in the night, and she looked more ghost than girl. Judge Crane entered. The jury, 6 men, all friends of the court, filed in. The charges were read aloud. Mariah didn't cry. Not now. She stared ahead, waiting for someone to stop it. No one did. But across the room, the doors creaked open, and Bo Renner stepped inside. Sober, straight-backed, eyes burning like fire. He held a journal in one hand. The courtroom didn't notice yet, but it would. The journal felt heavier than it looked. Bo Renner cradled it under his arm like it might shatter if he let it fall, like the words inside were dynamite wrapped in paper. The leather cover was cracked, the corners worn soft from being opened too many times by hands smaller than his. Alma's handwriting, slanted and careful, bled from its pages like old ghosts refusing to rest. He had walked through the night, every step burning like a confession. His legs ached, his back screamed, and his breath was tight in his chest. But he hadn't slowed, not when he reached the edge of the dry creek. Not when the chapel loomed like a shadow of judgment. Not when the courthouse bell tolled like a funeral knell. The sky had begun to pale, and a low wind whispered across the dirt. Dust Creek was already stirring. The baker lit his fires. The stable boys stretched the sleep from their shoulders. But the center of the town beat like a fever, thick with dread and anticipation. Word had spread fast. Mariah's trial would begin at sunrise, and the judge meant to hang her by nightfall. Bo stopped once, outside the saloon. Not for a drink. God, no, not today. But for a memory. He stared through the window at the stool, where he'd sat so many nights, numbing the silence inside him. It looked smaller now, pathetic almost, like a piece of wood pretending to be a home. He turned his back to it and didn't look again. The courthouse steps groaned beneath his boots. The doors were open. The crowd inside was growing restless. There were no pews, only rows of chairs pulled from the church basement and barrels flipped for sitting. At the front stood the judge, dark-robed and statuesque, his gavel already in hand, his mouth already wearing that sharp little smile that cut without showing teeth. Mariah stood near the center, bound at the wrists, a guard on either side. Her eyes were dark hollows, not from sleep, but from exhaustion of the soul. She didn't see Bo at first. Her gaze never lifted from the floor, as if she already knew the verdict carved into the wood around her. The prosecutor was a thin man with oily hair and a voice that slithered. He spoke with big words and long pauses designed to impress and distract. He talked about sin. He talked about the devil. He talked about women with secrets and smiles that led righteous men astray. He didn't talk about evidence. He didn't talk about facts. No one noticed. The defense was a placeholder, a clerk from the records office forced into the role because the last man refused. He stammered. He asked no questions. He seemed almost relieved when the judge silenced him after 10 minutes. Mariah was asked to speak. She opened her mouth. No one heard. It was just as Crane wanted. But then the doors creaked again. Bo stepped into the light, shoulders square, hat in hand, the journal pressed tight against his chest. Every eye turned. Every whisper died. Mariah saw him. For a moment her brows twitched. Not recognition. Bo had never spoken to her before, but something stranger. Confusion, maybe. Why now? Why him? Bo didn't look at her. Not yet. I got something to say, he called out. Crane didn't move. This is a court of law, Mr. Renner, not a confessional. It's about the girl, Bo said. The judge's smile returned. You're not on the list of witnesses. I don't give a damn, Bo said, louder now, the growl in his voice rising. You're gonna hear me out. Murmurs stirred through the room. The sheriff rose slightly, unsure. Crane's voice cooled. Mr. Renner, I suggest you sit before you disgrace yourself. Bo stepped closer. I already did that years ago. He reached the front. The deputies moved, but Crane held up a hand. Bo opened the journal and read. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even loud. But the words sliced through the air like a razor. April 3rd. He touched me again, said I was God's chosen, and I mustn't tell my father or it'd shame the Lord. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt gone. I wanted to run, but my knees locked. I think God left me. He paused. Gasps rippled from the crowd. April 11th. There's another girl now, a small one from the far pasture. He told her she was wicked and had to be cleansed. She came out crying. I tried to hold her hand, but she pulled away like I was fire. Mariah's legs wobbled. One of the deputies reached to steady her. Bo's voice cracked. That's my daughter's hand. That's her pain. This book's full of it, and this book was buried in my damn barn because I couldn't face it. He slammed it shut. Your holy man was a monster. And you all let him be. Crane's face twitched, only slightly, but enough for Bo to see it. I brought this, Bo said, holding the journal up like a relic. Because that girl didn't hang herself for nothing, and I won't let you do the same to this one, he turned to the judge. And I know damn well you knew. Crane's jaw tensed. You're accusing a judge, Mr. Renner, on the word of a dead child and a broken man? I'm accusing a man who protected a predator, Bo snapped, and I got more than a book. I've got names. He pulled from his coat a second piece of paper, yellowed and creased. Ledger from the church donations. Shows payouts. Shows hush money. You gave it. He spent it. And you thought nobody'd look. Now the room was no longer quiet. Someone stood in the back. A woman. Her voice trembled. He hurt me too. Another stood, then another. Voices rising like embers caught in wind. Crane slammed the gavel. Order! Order in this court! But order was gone. The sheriff stood. Judge, I think we need to pause this proceeding. Crane's eyes narrowed. This is my courtroom. Not anymore, the sheriff said. Mariah hadn't moved. Her hands were still bound, her lips parted, as if to say something, but all she could do was breathe. Breathe, and try not to collapse. Crane turned to Bo. You think you're some kind of savior? You're filth. A drunk. A man who let his own daughter. Bo crossed the floor and struck him. The punch wasn't hard, but it was final. Crane fell backward, blood at his lip, dignity shattered like a dropped mirror. The deputies made no move to stop it. The sheriff didn't flinch. Bo breathed heavy. You can hang me if you want, but I won't let her swing for the sins of that man. Crane was pulled to his feet and led away. No longer a judge. Just another man who lied too well for too long. Mariah collapsed into the chair, wrists shaking. Bo turned to her, finally meeting her eyes. You ain't alone now, he said. And for the first time in days, maybe years, Mariah believed it. The rope still hung from the gallows as the sun broke over Dust Creek, casting gold across the courthouse walls that had never known true warmth. It swung slightly in the morning breeze, as if remembering what it was built for, still aching for a neck, for weight, for silence. But it remained empty, and now it looked like an accusation more than a sentence. Mariah sat on a bench just beyond the courthouse porch, her wrists finally freed, though the faint bruises from the shackles remained like shadows painted across her skin. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold the tin cup of water the sheriff had given her. She hadn't spoken since Bo had stood up in the courtroom. Her voice lived in that space between silence and collapse, her body too tired to carry both breath and speech. Bo stood a few feet away, arms folded, back straight. He hadn't slept. He hadn't needed to. His heart hadn't stopped pounding since the moment he struck Crane, not because he regretted it, but because something had broken open inside him, something too old and buried to name. The sound of the judge's jaw cracking under his fist had felt less like vengeance and more like something holy. The silence that followed had felt like truth. A crowd gathered slow and uncertain, like deer testing the wind. Dust Creek didn't know what to do with this kind of day. No one had expected the trial to stop. No one expected the judge to be dragged out in chains. They certainly didn't expect the town drunk to be the one to save the girl. They stood across the street, near the bakery, near the blacksmiths, near the troughs where horses drank. Eyes watched, hands folded. Voices stayed low. Sheriff Doolin stepped onto the porch. His hat was in his hands, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "They're coming," he said softly. Bo didn't turn to him. "How long?" "Riders left just before sunup. Should be here by nightfall. U.S. Marshals." "And the judge?" "Locked up. We turned the cells upside down to find the keys he kept to himself. Found more than that." Bo glanced sideways. "Like what?" The sheriff hesitated. "Letters. Receipts. Money wrapped in church papers. Names." Bo nodded. "Burn it or give it to someone who ain't afraid to use it. I don't care which." Mariah looked up at them both. Her voice rasped. "What happens now?" The sheriff bent down a little, speaking gentle. "You ain't on trial anymore, girl." "That's not what I asked." Bo watched her, even with her voice so quiet. There was steel under it now. The same steel Alma once carried when she tried to shield the barn cats from coyotes, when she used to patch the fence herself because she didn't trust him not to drink and forget. "What happens now," Bo said, "is you start living." She looked at him, and her lips pressed together. Not quite a smile, but not nothing. A woman crossed the street slowly, skirts brushing the dirt. It was Margaret Lane, the widow who'd once tossed Mariah a bag of cast-off clothes without saying a word. Now she held a folded blanket and a tin plate of eggs and beans. She knelt beside the girl and didn't speak, just placed the blanket over Mariah's shoulders and set the plate in her lap. For the first time in her life, she looked Mariah in the eyes. Mariah stared at the plate, then at the woman, unsure. "It's hot," Margaret whispered. "Eat it while it is." And just like that, the silence of the town cracked again. By mid-morning, people started bringing things. A coat, a pair of boots that fit, a small loaf of cornbread wrapped in cloth, a brush for her hair. No one apologized. They didn't know how. But they came, and that was something. Inside the courthouse, the judge sat on the floor of his cell, stripped of his robe, stripped of his gavel, stripped of everything but breath. He hadn't spoken since the door locked behind him. He stared at the wall like it owed him answers. His lips still bled. His dignity had dried and flaked like paint. The sheriff watched him a while, then tossed the ledger through the bars. "They're going to want that," he said. Crane didn't move. "You know," Doolin said, "I ain't proud of the things I didn't say before, but I'm saying this now. You got less time than you think. I'd pray if I were you." The judge smiled then. Just a little. But it wasn't sane. It was the smile of a man who'd lost the map and didn't want to find it again. "I was the law," Crane whispered. "You were the hangman," the sheriff replied. Then he walked away. In the late afternoon, Bo sat on the chapel steps, the same ones where the preacher's body had been found. The blood had been cleaned, but the stones still remembered. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and stared at the steeple. The bell didn't ring anymore. A shadow moved behind him. "You shouldn't be here," Mariah said. Bo didn't turn. Neither should he. She sat beside him, pulling the blanket tighter. "I used to think I was cursed. Like maybe I'd done something wrong just by being born. Bo nodded. I used to think drinking could make the memories quiet. All it ever did was give 'em louder boots. I don't know where to go now, she whispered. You don't have to know. You just start walking. First step's the hardest. She hesitated, then asked, was she scared? Bo's jaw tightened. Alma. Mariah nodded. He closed his eyes. I think she was tired of being afraid. Mariah said nothing. They sat in silence until the wind changed. By nightfall, the marshals came. 3 men on horseback, dust in their coats, guns at their hips, eyes sharp. They took Crane without fanfare. They took the ledger. They took statements. But they didn't take Mariah. One of them asked her a question gently, then shook her hand like she was someone who mattered. Crane said nothing the whole time. As the town exhaled, the gallows were dismantled. Not by law, not by order, by hands. Men and women who once stood and watched. The same planks that were meant to kill became firewood by morning. Bo stood beside the burning pile and watched it crackle, eyes glossy in the orange glow. Mariah stood nearby, arms folded. What now? Bo turned to her. Whatever you want. The rest is yours. I want to build something, she said. Something that don't fall apart when men lie. He grinned. That's a tall order. I got time. And for the first time since she was a child, she believed it. The frost came late that year. By the time the last leaves fell from the stubborn old sycamore behind the chapel, the town had already changed in ways most folk couldn't name yet. The gallows were gone, burned to ash and scattered on the wind. The courthouse door, once a symbol of fear and finality, now swung open easier, as if the building itself had finally exhaled. Dust Creek had no preacher now, no judge either, and the quiet that followed their absence wasn't fearful, it was honest. Mariah woke each morning to the sound of hammers. Not gallows, not fences, but nails and planks and laughter that didn't shrink away. The old chapel, long abandoned and soaked in memory, had become a skeleton of something new. She stood on its wooden foundation with dirt on her hands and hope stitched across her sleeves. The steeple had been torn down first. She had asked Bo to do it, and he had done it in silence, swinging the axe like he was splitting wood and memory both. They built slow. She didn't ask for help. She just started working. And the help came. Children showed up first, mostly girls, quiet and watchful, hovering near the edges like deer at a clearing. Then their mothers, then a few men, good ones, the quiet kind. Nobody talked about what had happened unless they had to, but everyone understood that something bad had been chased away, and something new needed to be planted where it used to live. Bo came by every day. He never stayed long. Sometimes he brought tools, sometimes planks or nails or an apple from his orchard that was starting to grow again. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when he did, it was with a dry wit that landed soft. Mariah didn't need him to speak. His presence was enough. He stood tall now, straighter. The bottle hadn't touched his lips in months. One day, while setting up the first row of benches, Mariah asked, "Why do you still come here?" Bo shrugged. Habit. She didn't press him. The answer was enough. And it wasn't a lie. Winter crept in slow, tugging wind through cracked shutters and chilling the bones before the skin knew it. Mariah had no chimney yet, just a small stove someone donated from an old cabin, but she kept the fire lit and the tea hot. The girls who came to learn huddled close on benches, fingers smudged with ink and chalk. They learned letters first, then numbers. Then how to speak loud enough to be heard and kind enough to be remembered. It wasn't a church, she made that clear from the beginning. It was a school. A room where truth mattered. Where no one had to bow their heads to be believed. Where no man with power could ask for silence in return. And so she taught. In the evenings, she sat near the window with a notebook open and a pencil worn flat from use. The silver cross still hung from her neck. warm from the firelight. She wore it not as a mark of submission, but of memory, her mother's hand pressing it into her palm with the last of her strength. Sometimes she dreamed of her father, not often. The fire that took him came with noise and smoke and too many unanswered questions. She never truly knew if it was accident or intention. Dust Creek had always buried its sins deep, but now the town started unburying things. Clem, the barkeep, stopped her in the street one morning and handed her a ledger. "I reckon the saloon ain't a place for boys anymore," he said with a nervous chuckle. "Maybe you can teach 'em better numbers than I can." She took it with both hands and thanked him. He didn't look her in the eye. Not quite. But he smiled before walking away, and that was enough. The sheriff visited sometimes, always with something awkward in his hands. A basket of eggs, a tin of lard, a folded shirt that might fit one of the girls. He stayed by the door, hat in hand, speaking low. "I should have seen it," he said once, eyes on the floor. "Should have stopped it." Mariah didn't answer right away. "You see it now," she finally said. "That's what matters." He nodded, then turned and left before his face betrayed the wetness in his eyes. Bo fixed the porch steps that winter. They creaked too loud, and the girls kept tripping. He did it on a Tuesday without being asked, then disappeared again before lunch. Mariah found a folded cloth on the railing where he'd sat. Inside was a brooch, faded green stone, silver edges worn. Alma's. She held it for a long while. No note, no explanation, just the quiet weight of meaning left behind. Spring came like a revelation. The creek ran again. Not full, but enough to glimmer in the sunlight. Flowers bloomed in places too dry for them last year. The air carried bird song, not just wind. People smiled more. They stayed outside longer. Dust Creek didn't forget what had happened, but it didn't let it rule anymore. Mariah hung a sign above the door, the Lantern School. The name wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. Light in the dark. That was all she'd ever wanted. Bo showed up the day it opened. He wore a clean shirt, brushed his beard, stood at the back while Mariah welcomed the town. She wore a blue dress someone had sewn for her. Her hands didn't shake when she spoke. "Some of you don't know how to read," she said. "Some of you don't know how to speak in front of others. Some of you were told to stay quiet your whole life." She looked at the crowd, eyes steady. "That ends here." No one applauded. They just stood still, listening like they'd never heard a sermon worth repeating until that moment. When she stepped off the porch, Bo tipped his hat to her. "You built it," he said. "We built it," she replied. He didn't argue. He just smiled, the edges soft. A week later, Mariah visited the ranch. She hadn't been there since the day Bo pulled Alma's journal from the loft. Now she walked the gravel path between fences, repaired and straightened. Chickens scratched the dirt near the porch, a mule brayed from the barn. The fields were green. Alive. Bo was splitting wood near the side fence, sweat on his brow, the axe moving steady and sure. "You live here alone?" she asked. He paused. "It's enough. You ever think about teaching?" He looked at her sideways. "Not school things," she said, smiling. "Just things. How to mend, how to plant, how to fix." He shrugged. "Might." She nodded. "I think you'd be good at it." He didn't reply, but that night, a sign appeared outside the ranch fence. Bo's Fixings. Trade or teach. By summer, the school had tripled in size. Boys joined the girls. A few women asked to help. They built a second room, a fence for safety, a garden. Dust Creek had been a place where voices disappeared. Now it rang with spelling rhymes and laughter, and truth spoken aloud without fear. Mariah stood one evening by the creek, water rushing beneath her boots. She held her shoes in one hand and watched the light on the surface shift and ripple like memory. The wind lifted her hair and carried it back from her face. Behind her, footsteps. Bo. "You all right?" he asked. "I think so." He nodded, then pointed at the water. "Never thought I'd hear it run again." "Me neither." They stood together without speaking. Then Mariah said, "I'm not scared anymore." Bo looked at her, his eyes soft and proud. "Good," he said, "because now they'll listen." In a town once ruled by silence, fear, and the cruel weight of corruption, one orphan girl's courage and the redemption of a broken man sparked a fire that burned through injustice and planted the roots of hope. Mariah didn't just survive Dust Creek, she changed it forever. And in the ashes of a forgotten past, a new kind of love was born, not romantic, but fierce, protective, and unwavering, the kind that rebuilds a town and heals a soul. If stories of resilience, justice, and redemption in the untamed West stir something in your heart, then saddle up and subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles. Don't miss our next gripping tale where love rises from dust and heroes are forged in silence. Hit that subscribe button and ride with us. Every chapter tells the story of a spirit that refused to be broken.